Hello, this is Salvatore Vinciguerra. Welcome to this video on Old Salem in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Please enjoy this video. So as I'm going around the mountain, as you can see from my RV travels, from Mayberry or Mount Airy, North Carolina, I'm having a little stopover at Old Salem, North Carolina. And this is the Old Salem Museum and Gardens located in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. When visiting the Old Salem Museum and Gardens, always keep in mind when to visit Old Salem Museum and Gardens, and that's because they're not open year-round. Yeah, there's maybe 1 month out of the year during the winter months when it's snowing and it's really cold where they won't open it up, but you need to go and check out their website because they are also not open on certain days of the week. They're also not open on certain holidays. And on this time during the summer months of this year, they closed it down around 2 p.m. And if you got your ticket at a certain time and you really wanted to take your time walking through here and seeing all of the different living museums, and you wouldn't be able to get to see it because they'll close it down. And they didn't really give the visitors any notice. And I don't know what goes into some of those decisions, but it is quite disappointing that you have to be rushed. And can you imagine if I ended up coming here maybe at 1 or 2 p.m. and only had 1 or 2 hours to visit the whole facility or, the entire area, I would have had some problems. So when you first arrive at Old Salem, you need to first find the visitor center. I did, however, find the streets that you're going to see after I cross the bridge in just a moment. And yes, you can drive your car on the streets of Old Salem. However, that's not really the appropriate place and where they want the visitors to start out their experience. They want their visitors to start off first in this museum. It is air conditioned. There are some artifacts here. There are some movies here. And, it is a nice little museum to first start off to learn about Old Salem. And then I believe this part of it is free. And then if you want to go to the other part where they have the living museums as you cross the bridge, you do have to pay a certain fee to go over there and present your ticket to each of the different stations as you go through it. So some things to keep in mind as you're visiting Old Salem, and the first is that, the Welcome Center and some of the other places are barely air conditioned during the summer months. And in some instances, some of the air conditioners weren't working inside of the schoolhouse or some of the other places. And it made it very uncomfortable, not only for me as a visitor, but it made it uncomfortable for the people that work there. I felt very sorry for them. So take refuge, go inside of something that's air conditioned, then walk around, then go and patronize one of their little shops or see one of their experiences inside of one of their museums, and then walk around and so forth. And this is really self-guided, and that's a good thing, especially if you want to take your time as you're walking through the different areas of Old Salem. I found it very quaint. It reminded me of Boston or New England, and I guess it should because it's about the same time that some of these things were built, and maybe by some of the same populations of people. So it is Old Salem, North Carolina. Old Salem is basically the historic district of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, founded by the Moravians in 1766, about 100 years after the founding of Boston. The Moravians are a German-speaking Protestant type of religious community, and they first settled in Pennsylvania. And then 15 members of the Moravian Church traveled down to North Carolina. Their first settlement in North Carolina was Bethabara in 1753, and then they built this settlement in Salem in 1766. And quite extraordinarily, the Moravian Church purchased 100,000 acres of land in North Carolina. Now, if you've ever been to Boston, Massachusetts, the first thing you would notice is that Boston is intermixed with the old and new style buildings and communities, whereas this community in Old Salem is completely preserved. The most outstanding things to me about this particular area is, especially when you visit the church in just a few moments when I share with you the Moravian church. It is very impressive, the person that they have in there to share with us the history of the religious life that they had here that included black and indigenous peoples in the American South. And it is a very interesting living history museum that is just being preserved by the Moravians. So as you can see, I'm just kind of wandering around this particular area, just taking in the views, and I'm trying to find all of the different little spots where they have the living history. So the first one that I'm visiting is actually the pottery shop. So let's take a look at what's inside the pottery shop.
A little bit more vitreous than the earthenware clay that we use, so which is kind of like a terracotta. But it is glazed on the inside, so it can hold liquids. And sir, you're welcome to look around.
So I am very fascinated by the artwork and the pottery that's inside of this particular shop. However, they don't like to be filmed, and when you're visiting here and you want to do some filming, apparently you can't do that. But it is still very fascinating. If you take a look at each one of the photos, you can still tell what's going on here, and you can sit here for hours and watch her make this beautiful pottery here. And they actually do sell the pottery, and I don't know how reasonably they are priced in here, but you know, they are pieces of art, and you do need to be respectful of the artists, what they're doing in here, and the living history that they tell about, you know, some of their wares that they have here. I think that the living history part of this museum makes it come to life, or else, you know, otherwise you're just walking through an old city with, you know, nothing inside, and that can be very boring. But feel free to ask these people questions about what they do, about their lifestyle, and how they're creating these beautiful works of art. And from some of these different pictures, you can tell that they're in different stages of the creation of the artwork. And, you know, before something is glazed, after it's glazed and fired, and it really is a really nice museum to view. And so I'm just going outside again. Of course, it's, you know, very warm out here, but it's still nice underneath some of these trees. This is the Market Fire Engine House on the square. It was constructed in 1803 and then reconstructed in 1955. The Market Fire Engine House was built on Salem Square to provide a marketplace for fresh meat, which the local doctor had determined was necessary to supplement all the salted meat that the residents were eating. The other half of the building was used to store the fire equipment essential to the town's plan to prevent and manage fires. The town had been using fire equipment since 1785, after a fire had destroyed the first Salem tavern. The fire company is thought to be the first one of its kind in North Carolina. Now I'm crossing the square to see the boys' school. It was constructed in 1794 and restored in 1954. I want to say that the people inside of here, despite the fact that they did not have air conditioning in this building, made the experience still wonderful. They told a beautiful history of this particular house and the school that the boys went to. And this building was built to house the School for Boys in Salem. It was the first educational building in Salem. So the museum first starts off with a video that you can watch and take your time reading some of the various old school rules that they had. And then this other lady greets you, and she tells you a little bit about some of the stations, and you can spend hours with children of all ages going from station to station in this little educational building to learn about how the Moravians learned. And there's math, there's philosophy, there's music, are big parts of their culture. One of the biggest takeaways, I think, is what comes maybe a little bit later, and I may not have it recorded from the person in the church, in the Moravian church when we go there. But I want to say that that lady did kind of tell the audience about, how maybe the regular public school systems of today, they have no focus. They don't teach children how to put effort into every single thing that they do from the moment that they wake up until the moment that they go to sleep. And I just find that to be very extraordinary as a philosophy in education. Now, keep in mind, this is a boarding school. Keep in mind that it's a religious boarding school, and they can do those types of things. And I know some people may be startled by what I just said, and they may be offended by what I just said, but it's absolutely true. And I think that is something that needs to come back in education, where we focus on the basic elements of how we focus on our life. And the Moravians kind of made me go through a thought process and reflection, and I'm very grateful to actually be here and especially learn from their living histories. So for me, one of the biggest takeaways from the Moravian lifestyle is to put a lot of effort into what you do. That when you're doing something, you do it right the first time. And I just found that extraordinary. And they had all of these fusions. You can see even on this table here, the fusion of teaching everyone about the Native Americans, indigenous Americans, Black Americans, and they were all inclusive in this society. So it's just an extraordinary place to visit and to read more about maybe some of their educational philosophy with the religion is just so much about the culture of the people that lived in this area. If you were watching some of the photos from this segment in the video, you would also see that there was an all-girls school, and Salem Academy and College is the country's oldest private institution for women and girls. Schools for girls were rare in the early South. In Salem, single sister Elizabethan Osterlin began a small day school for girls in 1772. By 1788, families across the South were asking if their daughters could come to Salem to receive an education. In 1805, a girls' boarding school was constructed in Salem, and the first class had 30 girls from across the South. Girls took classes in reading, writing, syntax, history, geography, music, drawing, and needlework. In the late 1880s, the school was approved to offer a college education as well as the traditional preparatory program. It was the single sisters in Salem who were teachers and staff of the school for most of its early life. Now, let's go check out the church. So when I approached the church, I was really trying to figure out which doors of the church are open, and is the church open? Because usually in a place like this, church doors are open, but not in all cases can you just walk into a church and doors are open. Usually there's got to be a mass or some sort of ceremony going on inside before you can just open some of these doors. So just keep that in mind whenever you're visiting any town. You may want to check out when the services are, because that way you'll definitely know that some of these different churches and cathedrals are going to be open. This is the Home Moravian Church, and it was constructed in 1800. And yes, if you really want to see what one of the services look like, you can visit the website of the Home Moravian Church and watch one of their services. I was just impressed with the construction, the architecture of some of these places, and the person inside of the church who was just describing their religion, and actually we're going to be listening to one of the organs that they have inside of the church. So listen in the background as I'm taking this video to the tour guide, because I really do think that she's excellent. Some of these photos show what the church originally looked like with the pipe organ in the back, and they actually have this particular organ in the visitor center, and they do demonstrations with the organ over there as well.
Around here, the big ball teams are Carolina wheels right as far as student stage. And on the Sunday that we worship back in here, our associate pastor, who's retired, commented was not the color of Carolina Duke's Great Forest Estate. But they had found carpet to put in that was did not lend preference to one team or the other. And I thought it was very close, some people thought it was very close. But there are always differences. Yeah. Well, everybody's got something. Four of the chandeliers are original to the church renovated candles, and 2 are replicas. In a magazine, it's like find 10 things different in these 2 pictures. Well, on Sunday, not our current pastors, but previous was a boring sermon, and I sat at the balcony and I studied each one of them to see if I could tell which was original, which was replica.
Yeah, that's what we were told the last time we were here, that they don't really know. And nobody.
Oh, I don't know.
Well,
I guess if you would take them down and really examine them, which is like, we still do that. Last year we had a Christmas service the Sunday before Christmas for congregation members, and you had to have a reservation and a ticket. Because usually on Christmas Eve we pack to the gills for 4 services, and with COVID we just decided that was not what we could do. And so it's like every other pew was empty, and you still have this Milo home, the Colonel Milo, and his family lived there. He had an iron foundry. And the main floor were offices, the second floor was his home, and the 3rd floor were apartments for workers that didn't have a place to stay. Now it's all apartments for retired Moravians and other Moravian people that need a fairly expensive and safe place. I think. Yes. Oh, they're now 34. Cool. Go back one. Play. So this is
I'd like to thank that particular tour guide because she did a wonderful job describing the church. She even played the organ for me as a musician, as a music educator. That was wonderful just to have that type of experience. And I really didn't know too much about the Moravians coming to Old Salem, so it really opened my eyes. And then you kind of read about the history of the church. And it is one of the oldest Protestant denominations in Christianity, dating back to the Bohemian Reformation of the 15th century and the original Unity of Brethren, founded in the Kingdom of Bohemia 60 years before Martin Luther's Reformation. According to Moravian teaching, 6 things are essential. God creates, and God's creation is good. God redeems, God blesses. And we respond by having faith in what God has done and is doing, by loving God, loving ourselves, loving our neighbors, and loving our enemies, and by looking to the future with hope, because we know we will be with God. The key beliefs of the Moravian Church are that all people, regardless of race or gender, are spiritually equal, and that the Bible, in particular the New Testament, guides its followers to live like Jesus. Now, today, you'd be surprised by all of this, is that it is in East Africa that there are the highest number of Moravians, and that's where they're found today. And it's just so interesting that, this religion has spread even to Africa, and that's why you see some of the African influences and some of the different artifacts that you have there, because maybe they brought those back from Africa as missionaries. They did have African American people that lived and in some of these communities, in addition to some of the Native Americans or indigenous Americans, that they treated equally, and they buried them. You're going to see in just a few minutes where they buried all of these people regardless of who they were or where they came from. If they believed in the Moravian Church and their belief system, they were treated like equals. And it's just an extraordinary religion that is very insightful just to keep digging into their faith and philosophies to learn more about them. Don't forget to check out the gardens that they have on the property. There aren't that many, and I found this one. It has a little gate there, and there are flowers, there's bees flying around on each of the little blooms, there's apples in the tree, there's vegetables growing in this garden, and it's another part of life which the Moravians thought about, and it's essential, and this is how they would have grown, and this is what the plantings would have looked like in a typical garden that most probably would be duplicated many times throughout the whole experience here, as you would see maybe more of these gardens. And they're hard to maintain, especially in the heat that you have here. So I know that as you're watching some of the pictures and video, maybe I'm missing a lot of the historical value of some of the buildings and so forth, but I'm just giving you an overview as to what Old Salem really is. And each person's going to have their own interpretation as to how to view this particular museum. And that's what's great about such a museum, or any museum, is that you can interpret it any way that you want. But one of the highlights, which I didn't take a photograph of, is that there is a Salem Tavern where George Washington spent 2 nights while he was passing through North Carolina during his southern tour. Now, that tavern was burnt down and they reconstructed it, so I don't know how genuine the tavern really is. Some of what you're seeing is a lot of reconstruction, even when we walk inside some of the living museums. So, but if you are from this area, if you see something that maybe I missed, if you're Moravian and you'd like to comment in the comment section of the video, that would be awesome, because that would give us a different perspective, or just further our perspective as to what we're seeing here in Old Salem. This is God's Acre, and this is where the Moravian buried their dead. and burials are organized chronologically. There are no statues, only uniform white square headstones laid into the ground, and this is because the Moravians believed that everyone is equal in death. The graves are arranged in line with 18th century choir format. Men and boys are separated from women and girls. Family ties are not considered. The cemetery itself is considered a family plot. So it goes in line with their philosophy and how they treat everybody equal. The first burial in the cemetery was John Burkhead in 1771, and the first female burial was that of Eva Ann Baroth 2 years later. As of 2023, the cemetery contains over 6,000 burials. The cemetery is very impressive to me, just because they not only have all of these plots laid out, but they even have room for more people to be buried here as the church continues to grow and survive over time. So they really did have a lot of thought into the process of the development of this community. So I started my tour as soon as the museum opened up, and I really didn't have lunch to bring with me. Already in this 100-degree heat, I'm walking around, I need food, maybe I have a bottle of water. There's no place to eat, and just keep that in mind. It's not like you can just walk into some cafe. However, there is the Winkler Bakery, and it was constructed in 1800, restored in 1968, with an 1818 rear porch. Now, this is the only place that I was able to find food. They did have some very unique bakery items, and that included breads, cookies, all kinds of things in there. And just ask the person behind the counter. On this particular day, there was a young man, and he just helped, tell the story about the family that lived here. He helped describe the food, how delicious it was, how it was worth the amount of money that's there. And for this type of experience, go ahead and enjoy it. Cut yourself a piece of a cookie or a bread or whatever it is, and then move on. I would highly suggest packing yourself a bag lunch and just walking through, and snacks and water and stuff like that, especially on a hot day like this. There aren't really places to eat, and you'd have to maybe wait till you left this area. And I don't know why a tourist attraction like this doesn't try to, encourage people to spend the day and have nice places to eat somewhere in the park. And maybe I'm missing that somewhere in some of these pictures and video that I'm sharing, or at least in my experience, that was kind of a disappointment. And I hate to be really critical of the tourist attraction and the people who run it, but you have to really think about, well, where is Old Salem? Old Salem is in the middle of nowhere, very remote location from a lot of other things, or at least for a tourist that is visiting. And it would be nice to have some nice venues or eateries, so that way people can enjoy a taste of the Moravian lifestyle. It could be a fusion. Bring out your best chef. And maybe there are other problems that we just don't see. I know that some of the national parks, they don't like some of the food, or it brings in pests. It has a lot of trash. Maybe they can't manage it. Maybe it's just not worth the expense. Or maybe people aren't just making the money on the product, so they wouldn't make any money on a restaurant. And a restaurant can, in just general, be just a very costly adventure, and no return on your investment. And now I'm off to the Miksch House and Gardens, and thank goodness this was still open, because there isn't that much open at this time of day, especially in the summer. And I really thought that this was very interesting. The people in here described the lifestyle of the family. They described the furnishings. They described how they ate, how they slept. Look very carefully at the photos, especially in the bedrooms and the kitchen. And then I bring you out into the garden to see how one of the families would live in a place like this that was built in the 1700s. And the Miksch House was the first single-family home built in Salem. Before this time, they had basically row houses further north on South Main Street that had been constructed as shared living spaces for the first settlers of Salem. The Miksch House was built of logs, although it was soon covered in clapboards and painted. By 1785, a small addition was added to the rear of this house. Matthew Miksch was trained as a gardener in Europe, where he learned the skills to support his family by growing and selling vegetables, seeds, young fruit trees. He also processed and sold tobacco, and his wife, Henrietta, baked and sold gingerbread. So you'll notice that when you walk into a home like this, it's very dark. It doesn't seem to have electricity, and in the 1700s, they didn't have electricity. There is a fire going on, and yes, it's summer, and they have a fire going on. It's quite toasty in here, maybe just as toasty in here as it is outside. Don't forget to take the opportunity to go up to the second floor, as this is where they would maybe dry some herbs, and maybe do some sewing and some other things up here. I was kind of intrigued at the bedroom that they had here, and you have to look very carefully at the picture to see how it's described. And the adults would sleep in the main bed, the kids would sleep in that little mattress underneath the bed, and then they have this little cup here on the side of the bed. Can you guess what that's for? And notice the distance between the bed and the wall. Take your time looking at some of this stuff. Ask questions. I thought I was just rushed just to try to see everything that I could before they closed the park, or they closed some of the living experiences. Don't forget to walk out of the back door of the house, so that way you can see what's in the backyard. You get to see this oven. This is where they would bake bread. There are some other little buildings there that I'm going to share with you in just a second. And then there's the garden, and that's part of the property. This is how the people lived. This is where they grew their vegetables. This is where they raised their children. So take your time if you can and see it. This is the summer, and yeah, you would expect things to be growing in the spring and the summer, but maybe in the winter, visit this place at a different time of the year, it would look totally different. And now be visiting the St. Phillips African Moravian Church. It was constructed in 1861 with 1890 additions and restored in 2004. Historic St. Philip's Church is the oldest African American church still standing in the state of North Carolina and one of the earliest in the entire country of the United States of America. Built for the African American congregation, the church matched most of the other churches in the area built at the same time with the large brick Greek Revival style. The church was expanded in 1890 with the need to add more classroom space downstairs and above in the balcony. The church extended out into the graveyard, which later caused structural issues on the front walls. The congregation moved out of the building in 1952, and the church sat vacant until it was restored for the use of the Old Salem Museums and Garden Tours. The steeple, which had been removed in the 1920s, was part of the exterior restoration. The original pews and other details are back in place inside the building. It was from the pulpit of this brick church that on Sunday, May 21st, 1865, a Union cavalry chaplain announced freedom to the enslaved community in and around the town of Salem, now Winston-Salem. So of course, as I'm visiting the church, I wish some of these places, especially this one and the next one I'm going to share with you, were open, and apparently that they weren't. Because they do have little museums inside of here, and it's just interesting to see some of the insides of the church, just for the historical value of it and to see what's in there. But they do have, if you see the next structure, and I'm going to share with you, I did try to peek in some of the windows because they do have some museums in there, and I'm sure that they bring school children in there to educate them on what these buildings are. If you are a historian, please feel free in the comment section to maybe correct something that I'm saying, give us more details as to what we're viewing here. But you do have to take into perspective what is going on in the United States during this time. And you would think that, oh, well, aren't the Moravians, don't they believe that everybody should be worshiping together and living together? And so why do they have separate places? A foreigner would walk into this and say, well, that's nice, they have their own church. Well, that's not really the way that their community was intended to be. And, they, as a congregation, had to vote to split the congregation and have the African Americans worship by themselves in their own church. And that's because of a state law that North Carolina put into place in 1816. So before that time, African Americans who joined the Moravian Church attended the home Moravian Church, the original church that I shared with you. And in 1861, St. Philip was constructed. It's now restored. The church was originally built by the Salem congregation for the enslaved and free African Americans for the community. Completed just before the Civil War in 1861. Again, they do say that this is the only or the oldest surviving African American church built for that purpose. And the Emancipation Proclamation was read to the congregation. So very much of a historical significant value. And I don't think that it's being highlighted appropriately. This should be open just as the church is open. And in the tours, people need to make more of a big deal about this and know that these things are here sitting in their historical district. They coming together as Moravians and then being forced to separate into two different congregations. The separation is a governmental type of thing. It also happened in New Orleans. It happened in many different places of the United States that people just don't talk about the history that's behind it, whether it is a state law or whether it's a national law put in by the United States of America, dividing everybody. So it's just something to think about. Do we want this division, or do we want to bring people together? Sitting right next to the St. Philip's African Moravian Church is the African Moravian log church. So what's the difference? Well, this one was constructed in 1823. It was built using funds from the Female Missionary Society and with logs raised by the African American members. This was an important part of the early African American community. Built of white oak logs, some weighing up to 2 tons, it was a substantial building that survived as Freedmen's Hospital and later as a residence. Reconstructed with a modern interior, it offered orientation to the St. Philip's Heritage Center through mixed media exhibits as a meeting space for activities and African American genealogical research. And now I'll be sharing with you a little bit of the historic overlook that sits behind some of the properties that they have here. And there is a pathway. It leads to a soccer field that's divided by a highway, and maybe there's supposed to be more of the property that is extended beyond this point that was originally a part of this particular area. And I don't know what happened. If someone can just describe maybe in the comment section, was this property divided this way? Was it supposed to look this way? But there's a soccer field right out here, and it is nice to know that there are other communities of North Carolina that sit out here. But can you imagine if this was continued to be or preserved as a wooded park experience? It is one of the only shaded places where maybe you could, if they had a bench out here, or a picnic table, you could have lunch. And maybe they don't want people to do that, but it certainly is a nice place just to take a walk around and learn about what's back here, because this is how this property would have looked. You have to explore. Were there more people buried back here? Is this a part of the graveyard that they had as the church? And why is this overlook so important to their community? And look very carefully, especially when I film the introduction and the conclusion of this video where I do the intro and outro. Those are significant places, and I did it on purpose. And when I get the back of the doctor's house, I don't go into, oh, that's the doctor's house. But I share with you that there are some stones while I'm talking about some other things. And believe it or not, that is the only remnants of an African American dwelling on the property. And as you can see with here, where I'm sharing with you this particular part of the property, this is a facade. And then the archaeologists are still uncovering more of what this community looked like, who lived here, and it's a work in process. So finally, I get to this air-conditioned museum. It's the Frank L. Horton Museum Center. And it really is the home to the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts. The most significant things for me are just taking a look at these instruments and photographing them, because musical instruments on display in a museum, especially of this age, are rare. You can maybe only see them in the Boston Museum of Arts. And so therefore, just trying to see some of this early American furniture for some people can be very interesting to look at. So keep in mind, this is one of the most air-conditioned parts of the whole area, and you need to make sure that you plan accordingly. Where could you stick this museum into your tour? You could spend 2 hours in this museum if you really wanted to. It depends upon how much you want to really look at the American furniture and artwork in here. To me, as a Southerner, as a person who lives in the United States, this is not that significant to me. And I would spend my time on other places that are part of the living history of Old Salem. Overall, I do want to say that I did enjoy the historical significance of Old Salem. It was very insightful for me to visit this place and even to dig into more of the history afterwards. I don't think that before somebody told me go visit Old Salem, I understood the historical significance of visiting a place like this, but it is very eye-opening from the Moravian philosophical and religious beliefs to just discovering more about the historical parts and how people lived together in the early part of our country. And I bring you back to the doctor's house, and that's where I'm filming my intro and outro once again. But it's what's in back of these houses, or in back of this house, that has significance, and that's because this is where the Davy house would have been, or the David house. And I would encourage you to follow the link that I'm going to be putting in the description box below of this video, so that way you can find out more about Old Salem. And if there's anything in here that I'm missing, or maybe can give us more insight into this area of Old Salem, the historical places, or the culture of the Moravians, please put that in the comment section below, as I would love to hear from any of the viewers as to their opinions about visiting such a wonderful place. This is Salvatore Vinciguerra. Thank you for watching this video on Old Salem in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. If you like this video, please like it, subscribe to this channel, and have a great day. Thank you.